All right, hello everybody, Daniela here with Parenting L'Chaim. And today I want to talk about probably one of my most subjects, arguing with our children. It's exhausting for us, it's exhausting for them. It normally leads to major meltdowns, resentment on both sides, and major disconnects with our kids. And not to mention, it takes so much energy to argue. So my big thing that I realized, it was kind of an epiphany moment, is we make a decision to argue with our children. We engage with them. And so I was actually at a parenting conference one time, and the amazing parenting guru was discussing the concept of agreeing to not argue with your children ever again. I cannot count how many times, and I'm still guilty of it times when I slip out of it, is saying, I'm not going to argue with you. I am not going to argue with you. And I continue, and I actually argue with them. And so this is where we need to hold our boundaries, moms and dads. We need to make a commitment to not argue with children. And so I heard this little trick, and it is very, very funny and very awkward in the beginning to do. Most of my people in my parenting classes are like, this is not going to work. But I assure you, it works. It takes a few times to feel normal. And then when you feel how powerful it is to take the power back and not argue with your children, you will adore this move. So they told me to say, I only argue. And then you set a specific time of day on this day. So for me, I tell my children, I only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays. It's the one day our family sleeps in. It's the one day nobody's awake. And so my children, if they come at me and they want to discuss something and I've already given my answer, I say I only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays, and I walk away. I walk away, guys. I do not engage. I do not go back and forth. I do not banter. I say I only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays. And guess what? My kiddos will constantly laugh, they'll giggle, they'll sigh, they walk away, and they don't argue because they know I'm not going to engage. And it's such a freeing thing, and it's a silly little thing. And so now my kids, they think it's funny. They'll be like, oh, is it 6 a.m. on Saturday? Or they'll talk about wanting to set an alarm, or things like that, to be able to come and argue with me at 6 a.m. on Saturday. And you can pick whatever random time. For me, 6 a.m. on Saturday is a time that most likely no one will ever be awake in my house. And so it's a time that is basically telling them, I'm never going to argue with you. And it's not my job to argue, and it's not my job to, discuss and debate things that are not negotiable. And so we need to learn, number one, we do not have to argue with our children. We choose to argue with our children. And so when we take that power back and we say, I only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays. Or you can simply say, I don't argue. I will not argue with my child. And you can tell them, I'm sorry, I do not argue. Okay, so that's a very quick tip that a lot of people have found very, very helpful. It is awkward in the beginning. The first time you say it, you're probably going to fumble, and your kid's going to look at you like, what is going on? But I'm telling you, the more you use it and the more comfortable you get with not arguing with your children, and the shrugs, and they walk away and they realize, oh, mom's not giving in right now. It's such a freeing feeling to know that we are not arguing. When we're in the grocery store and they're asking for something for the 10th time, and we say, I only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays. Only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays. And I keep walking. And I feel free to completely let go of that situation. I've made it clear to my child that this is the boundary that I've set. It is not negotiable, and we're moving forward. Now, again, we also want to make sure that we're setting times with our children to discuss things that actually need to be negotiated. We want to make sure what is negotiable and what is not negotiable. We want to give our children the power and freedom to make good decisions within safe boundaries. We don't want to take the freedom of choice or their voice away. So I want to make sure that I'm being very clear. I'm not saying every time your child speaks to you, you tell them, I don't argue. This is not what I'm explaining. But when we are in a grocery store, when Ima is trying to make dinner, when whatever is going on, we are more than welcome to say, I do not argue. I will not argue. and we need to hold to that boundary. And so I encourage everyone to give that a try. I'd love to hear in the comments all of the funny ways that this goes. It's one of my favorite parts of parenting class, is coming back that next week into class and hearing all of the parents' stories of their first time telling their children that they only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays and how it went. And it's always a very fun time to experience. So I'd love to hear in your comments how this went. Again, your kids are going to look at you like you're crazy because they think you are, because they are so used to arguing with you, and they're going to have to be newly introduced to this new healthy parent with firm boundaries that is not going to argue. Why? Because we love our children too much to argue. That's another thing that is very common. If I don't argue, I only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays, isn't natural for you. Another one that I highly suggest is saying, I love you too much to argue with you. I value you too much to argue with you. These are situations where we are telling them, I love you too much to do something that's going to be detrimental to our relationship. I do not argue, right? So these are the things. We don't say, I'm not going to argue with you, and then continue to lecture and continue to argue. When we make that statement, I'm not going to argue with you, it needs to be done. But that also means we don't get to say the last word afterwards. We don't get to keep going and lecture. It has to be a two-way street, because lecturing is a part of arguing. So we want to make sure that we're actually being honest in that. So I only argue at 6 a.m. on Saturdays. And we walk away, and we give our children the ability to process their own emotions. Now later, if they want to come to us, if we want to actually set a time where our children can weekly check in with us and say, hey, this really hurt my feelings, or hey, are we open to do this? Family meetings are a great time to do this and communicate and check in. I'm a huge fan of checking in at the dinner table. My family likes to do this fun little thing of going around the table and telling people things that they're grateful for, or maybe apologizing for something that happened during the week, or saying something positive about every family member, to encourage bonding and to encourage vulnerability and openness in the family. This also will minimize the amount of arguing. When your child feels heard and your child knows that your boundaries are your boundaries, they will stop testing them. Thank you, and I hope this was helpful. Again, in the comments, I would love to hear everyone's comments on talking about how they only argue on Saturdays. Please comment below. Thank you, and have a great day.